without further ado, let's get to the big story of the week, and that is, of course, the latest HHN announcement. So, kind of breaking some tradition here, there is an announcement for an original house for the first time, and I'm sure you guys will let us know how odd this is for original house to be announced this early on. So it's been 3 weeks since the last announcement, which of course was Stranger Things, which is pretty big. So this house that has been announced is called Dead Exposure Patient Zero. So we're going to leave it to head it over to Mark Kleinhans to kind of give us a primer, if you will, on Dead Exposure Patient Zero, what we know about this house.
A primer?
It's not paint.
I was speaking in Mark Kleinhans' language.
In English, right. So that joke never gets old, does it? Dead Exposure Patient Zero is a follow-up, but is really a prequel to a previous haunted house from the event back in 2008 called just simply Dead Exposure. And the idea behind that, I never made it to this particular haunted house. I think Taylor did, if I'm not mistaken. But I've read all about it. What? I'm sorry. What?
I didn't make it to it.
You didn't go in 2008?
I went in 2008, but I didn't go to Dead Exposure in 2000.
Are you kicking yourself now? Like, man, what a jerk.
Yeah. All right, Mark, anyway, continue on with Dead Exposure.
Yes, we'll let Taylor contemplate his failure silently in the corner. Dead Exposure is all about zombies, which is not a particularly fresh topic, even back in the distant year of 2008. But I feel like they had a very interesting twist on it, which is you walk into basically this photographer's portfolio. And so they try to reenact these living photographs around you. It's pitch black. You walk through, and all of a sudden there's a strobe light that kicks on. You hear the sound effect of a camera clicking, like a shuttering, I guess is the verb. And then you have a couple seconds of bright light, and you get to see, black light, and you get to see the zombies around you. And sometimes when the lights come on, the zombies are in your path. When the lights go down, you can walk through. Sometimes they attack you, sometimes they don't. It sounds like a really neat, tense, scary haunt. And you know, Mike, you know how you want your haunted houses scary. I do too. And this sounds like something that's very interesting. This one takes place in 1982. Which is a really interesting topic in of itself that we'll have to do a little quick sidebar on later. Sounds like it's a prequel. I don't know if there was any definitive date that was issued for the original haunted house back in 2008. But this one is 1982 Paris. The infection is just spreading. Zombies are just starting to run amok. You're forced into this quarantine zone by the military. They give you an antidote to the virus. Excuse me, not the T virus, Mike. This isn't Resident Evil. Don't get too excited. Whatever zombie virus it is. By the way, another sidebar here. I like how this government, of course, it's the French government, is very on the ball and is very effective and has a vaccine for the zombie virus right away. Unlike Walking Dead or practically 99% of other zombie movies, you have to wait years and years and years and everyone dies.
And then finally, a catch.
But yes, there is a catch, as always. It leaves you blind. So I feel like that's going to be their way of explaining how they're not going to do the whole conceit of you walking through a photographer's portfolio. This time it's you're blind from getting this vaccine, but maybe you can just see a couple seconds of light, and that's how they're going to explain the gimmick this time around. So there.
Interesting. I do kind of find it interesting that it is a period house set in 1982, I think you said it was.
Yeah, and I should have looked this up before we started recording. Bad mark. If I'm not mistaken, the first season of Stranger Things takes place in 1983. So far, both of the two houses that were announced definitely have this 80s vibe going on, which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, to me, just if Universal announced, hey, here's a zombie house, and that's it. I wouldn't be too interested in it, but definitely making it kind of like this period house in the 80s especially is very interesting. You can kind of see a little bit hints of that in the video they kind of put out. It kind of looks like VHS, static or whatever on the screen. So yeah, cool. Definitely interesting to see. They're kind of they're putting a twist on something that could be pretty bland for the most part. They're putting a little bit of a twist on it to kind of make it interesting. Yeah. And I just love that random monkey in the video that they released along with the announcement of this house. That's just good stuff.
Zombie monkey. It's 12 monkeys. So
Go ahead, Mark.
here's the big question, Mike. I'm going to take your conductor's hat for a second. Taylor, why would Universal break precedent and announce an original house so early in the process? And not only that generally, but why this house specifically, do you think?
Yeah, I really don't know. As
Good
far
answer.
as why this house specifically, it might just be a matter of this was the original ready. So it wouldn't be shocking at this point for all the other original houses not to be completely finalized to the point where they can announce it. Whereas this one might have been, so that might explain why this one. As far as why the strategy in general of them announcing a original so early on, and a single original too, because a lot of times they would group the originals together. It just seems like a different strategy they're going with this year. They are keeping up with the kind of 2016 announcement schedule. So at this point in 2016, we'd also seen 2 house announcements. So maybe they're just trying to keep a more consistent flow of announcements. And one way to do that is to kind of fill in the spaces with original houses, because the intellectual property announcements have a tendency to be harder to coordinate because you're working with outside parties. Whereas, this, you don't have to worry about any other people besides Universal.
I was going to ask you if just a 3-week interim was usual, because in my experience, the last couple of years, usually it's a lot longer than just 3 weeks.
2016 was the exact same. So it's not that uncommon, but I mean, as a general rule, it's getting earlier and earlier every year.
Could we see more announcements kind of spread out over maybe a shorter amount of time? Mark mentioned that usually they're spread out further, but you also mentioned that usually they group the original houses together. So you think maybe they'll spread it out and, keep all the individual houses as individual announcements themselves, and we'll just get more announcements spread over the same amount of time?
Yes, I would assume since they announced this one separately, they're probably going to announce all the original houses separately. Of course, they don't have to, but I feel like that's a safe guess.
I think it'd be neat if we got an IP house, intellectual property house, for the next announcement, whenever that may be, 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, and then go back to an original, and then they keep alternating. I think as a fan, that would be really cool to me to have that nice balance.
Yeah, that wouldn't shock me. That might be what they're going for this year. So we'll just have to wait and find out. But yeah, Dead Exposure is a really cool franchise, and it was really, really popular in 2008. It was the house of the year, I believe. So real good reviews in 2008. So it'll be really interesting to see what they do 10 years later.
It'd also be interesting if you stop clicking your mouse so much. We should also mention that Exposure came back for one single scene in 2010's event, the 20th anniversary house. And that's it. Just a little factoid for you.
Oh, very interesting.
But that was really more of a corner. So they had some space between 2 scenes. So it was really, I mean, you could call it a scene, but it was really more of like you're turning the corner into a new scene.
It was acknowledged. We'll call it that. All right. So thank you, Mark and Taylor, for breaking down Dead Exposure, Patient Zero. And of course, whenever there's a new HHN announcement, we'll be sure to talk about it here on the Orlando Informer podcast. And in between then, if you're interested to see and read more about the details of this year's 2018 Halloween Horror Nights, head over to hhn.guide to read all about it and get up to date on the latest news that we have over at Orlando Informer. If you like this video, you should listen to the whole show. Click on the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe. Head over to orlandoinformer.com/podcast for all our past episodes.